Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku inherited the mutant gene and was hunted by the X-Men. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Aldera Junior High was a stagnant soup of adolescent apathy and chalk dust. For Izuku Midoriya, it was also thick with a low-grade, ever-present dread, a pressure that settled behind his eyes and made his shoulders hunch as if bracing for a blow. He sat at his desk, head down, furiously scribbling in a slightly scorched notebook labeled Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The teacher's voice was a monotonous drone, a background buzz to the far more interesting world of quirk theory and combat application Izuku had built for himself within the grid-lined pages. And as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures, the teacher said, his tone dripping with manufactured enthusiasm. I would hand out these career aptitude tests, but... He snatched the papers from his desk and tossed them into the air with a theatrical flourish. Why bother? I know you all want to go to the hero track, the classroom erupted. Students unleashed their quirks in a chaotic display of youthful exuberance. One boy elongated his fingers into woody tendrils. A girl blinked, and her eyeballs popped out on stalks, swiveling around the room. It was a cacophony of minor miracles, a daily reminder of the world Izuku was not a part of. He tried to sink lower in his chair, to shrink into a space so small he might simply cease to exist. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks, the teacher placated. But no power usage in school. You know the rules, a familiar, gratingly confident voice cut through the noise. Teach, don't lump me in with these losers. Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet propped on his desk, a lazy, arrogant smirk plastered on his face. I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. The class turned on him, a mixture of outrage and grudging respect. Get over yourself, Bakugo, you're all extras. Bakugo shot back, slamming his foot down. The teacher consulted his clipboard. Ah, Bakugo. You, of course, are aiming for UA High. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is less than 0.2%. They say their entrance exam is impossibly hard. That's exactly why it's the only place worthy of me, Bakugo declared, leaping onto his desk. A tiny, contained explosion popped from his palm, smelling of burnt sugar. I aced the mock exams. I'm the only one at this garbage-tier school who could get in. I'll surpass even All Might and become the #1 hero. Not to mention the richest, Izuku flinched. UA was more than a dream. It was the sacred ground upon which all his hopes were built. He had studied its alumni, memorized the layout of its campus from public records, and analyzed every known facet of its infamous entrance exam. He too had applied. He had to. The teacher, still scanning his list, found another name. His expression shifted from sycophantic approval to mild, dismissive pity. Oh. Midoriya. You're also planning to apply to UA, aren't you? The world stopped. For a single, silent second, every eye in the classroom swiveled to fix on Izuku. The air, once filled with chatter, was now a vacuum. Then, it was broken by a single snort, which cascaded into a tidal wave of derisive laughter. It crashed over Izuku, a physical force that made him tremble. Midoriya? No way, you can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do? They got rid of that rule. Izuku stammered, pushing himself up, his voice a pathetic squeak. His protest was a paper shield against a hailstorm. There's no precedent, but it's not impossible. A small, sharp explosion blasted his desk, sending him stumbling back into his chair. Bakugo loomed over him, smoke curling from his palm, his red eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. The laughter died, replaced by the tense silence that always accompanied Bakugo's focused rage. Deku! Bakugo snarled, the name he'd given Izuku years ago, a different reading of his name, meaning useless. You're worse than these rejects. You're quirkless. You think you can stand in the same ring as me? Izuku couldn't meet his gaze. He stared at the floor, at his own red sneakers, his entire body shaking. And no, Kaken, you've got it all wrong. I'm not trying to compete with you. I swear, It's been my dream since I was little. And, well, there's no harm in trying. No harm in trying? Bakugo's voice was a low growl. Are you taking the exam for fun? What the hell can a quirkless nobody like you do? Izuku had no answer. He could only shrink under the weight of that question, the same question that had haunted him for a decade, ever since the doctor with the glasses had given him the diagnosis that was a death sentence for his dreams. The X-ray of his foot, showing 2 joints in his pinky toe, was seared into his memory, a biological artifact. An evolutionary dead end. The final bell was a mercy. Izuku packed his bag with robotic efficiency, his one goal to disappear before Bakugo could corner him again. He was almost at the door, a sigh of relief on his lips, when a hand snatched the notebook from his grasp. We're not done here, Deku. Bakugo held Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13 between 2 fingers as if it were a piece of trash. His 2 lackeys flanked him, smirking. What's that, Katsuki? His diary? One of them snickered, extending a finger that stretched like putty. Hero Analysis? Bakugo read the cover aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. Seriously? You're still doing this? He flipped through the pages, his expression twisting into a deeper scowl. All these notes. It's creepy. You're a stalker. Give it back, Kaken! Izuku pleaded, his voice cracking. It's mine! Bakugo didn't respond. He simply placed the notebook between his palms. A sharp crackle pop echoed in the empty classroom, and the notebook erupted in a small, contained blast. Izuku cried out as if he'd been struck. The cover was blackened, the edges charred and smoking. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, Bakugo tossed the smoldering book out the open window. Izuku stared aghast. It landed with a faint plop in the koi pond below. You can't! The best heroes showed signs of greatness even as students, Bakugo said, placing a heavy, warm hand on Izuku's shoulder. The heat was a threat. I'll be the first and only hero from this crappy school. The story of my origin will begin here. So don't you dare apply to Yue, got it? He turned to leave, his cronies trailing behind him. At the door, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. You know, he said, his voice deceptively soft, almost conversational. If you really want a quirk so badly, there's a quick way to get one. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of glass. For a moment, Izuku's despair was so absolute it morphed into something else. A flicker of rage, hot and white, flared in his chest. His hand clenched into a fist. He opened his mouth to shout, to scream, to say something. But Bakugo turned, his palms already sparking with tiny, intimidating explosions. Something to say? The rage died as quickly as it came, extinguished by a decade of ingrained fear. Izuku's shoulders slumped. His fist uncurled. He said nothing. Bakugo scoffed and walked away, the sound of his laughter echoing down the hall. Izuku stood alone in the silent classroom, the silence now more deafening than the laughter had been. He trembled, not from fear, but from a profound, bone-deep hollowness. He walked to the window and looked down at his notebook, floating pathetically among the lily pads, its ink bleeding into the water, a soggy, ruined monument to his impossible dream. The walk home was an exercise in self-flagellation. He replayed the scene over and over, his own cowardice the star of the show. He fished the notebook from the pond, the waterlogged pages clinging together, the detailed drawings of Kamui Woods and Mount Lady now warped, blurry monstrosities. He tried to squeeze the water out, but it was useless. It was ruined. Just take a swan dive off the roof. Kaken hadn't meant it. He knew he hadn't. It was just Bakugo being Bakugo, cruel and thoughtless. But the words had found a crack in Izuku's soul and taken root. What if? The thought was a venomous whisper. Would it be better? To just stop? To stop being a disappointment to his mother, a punching bag for Kaken, an error in the system? He shook his head, clutching the damp notebook to his chest. No. All Might wouldn't give up. All Might always smiled, no matter how bad things got. He had to be like All Might. He forced a watery, trembling smile onto his face, a caricature of his idol's famous grin. It was this pathetic attempt at bravery that carried him into the dark, grimy underpass. The air was cool and damp, smelling of moss and stale water. The solitude was a small comfort. Here, no one was laughing at him. Here, he was just a boy walking home. A strange, gurgling sound echoed from behind him. It was like a blocked drain trying to clear itself. Izuku paused, turning around. A green, viscous sludge was pouring out of a sewer grate, coalescing into a monstrous, shifting form. Two huge, yellow eyes floated in the morass, swiveling to fixate on him. A wide, jagged mouth stretched across its formless face. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and horrible. Perfect. I need to hide. Izuku froze. His hero-analyst brain, the one Bakugo had mocked, screamed at him. Villain. High threat level. Fluid body makes physical attacks ineffective. Possible suffocation-type quirk. His body, however, was useless. His legs were stone. His lungs were ice. The sludge monster lunged. It was on him in an instant, a cold, foul-smelling tidal wave. It poured over him, into his mouth, his nose, his ears. It was like drowning and being buried alive at the same time. His limbs were pinned, his struggles absorbed by the creature's amorphous body. Don't worry, kid. I'm just hijacking your body. The villain's voice echoed, muffled, from inside his own head. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then it'll all be over. Panic, pure and primal, consumed him. His lungs burned. Black spots danced in his vision. I'm going to die. I'm going to die here. In a tunnel. No one will know. Is this it? Is this my end? Mom. I'm sorry. He clawed desperately at the sludge, his fingers finding no purchase. His notebook, his ruined, precious notebook, slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground with a wet slap. No. No, I don't want to die. Something inside him, a desperate, feral instinct, fought back. He thrashed, he kicked, he tried to scream, but the sludge only forced its way deeper. His vision began to tunnel. The world was fading to black. Suddenly, the pressure lessened. A voice boomed through the tunnel, a voice he knew better than his own. Have no fear, for I am. Izuku's consciousness was fading, but he saw a flash of red, white, and blue. He felt a gust of wind so powerful it felt solid. The sludge was blasted away from him, scattering against the tunnel walls. He collapsed to the ground, gasping, coughing, his lungs aching as they greedily sucked in air. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears and residual sludge, and saw him. All Might. In the flesh. His smile was even more brilliant in person. All Might. Izuku breathed, but the scene fractured. The image of his hero wavered, like a heat haze. The triumphant smile, the booming voice, they weren't real. They were a hallucination, a desperate fantasy conjured by a dying mind. The pressure returned. The sludge villain, which had recoiled for a moment at the sheer force of Izuku's desperate thrashing, engulfed him once more. There was no hero coming to save him. There was no All Might. There was only the suffocating slime and the gurgling, triumphant voice of the villain. Nice try, kid. Real fighter, aren't ya? The villain rasped. But it's over now. Just relax. The last dregs of Izuku's strength gave out. His limbs went limp. His thoughts dissolved into a formless gray fog. He was dying. He was quirkless, and he was dying. And then, just as he was about to let go, the villain recoiled again, this time on its own. Damn it, he'll be here soon. I can't stay in the open. With a final, disgusting sucking sound, the sludge retreated, pouring back into the sewer grate it had come from, leaving Izuku a heap on the ground, covered in filth, but miraculously alive. He lay there for a long time, the only sound his own ragged, painful breaths. All Might hadn't saved him. He had just been an inconvenient vessel. Too small. Too weak. He had been saved by his own inadequacy. The irony was a bitter pill, so sharp it made him want to vomit. Shaking, filthy, and deeply traumatized, Izuku stumbled out of the underpass and continued his walk home on autopilot. He didn't notice the crowds gathering ahead, the sirens, the smoke rising into the afternoon sky. He was trapped in the prison of his own mind, the feeling of the sludge still clinging to his skin, the villain's words echoing in his ears. He finally looked up when he heard a familiar series of explosions. It was a sound he knew intimately, the sound of Bakugo's quirk. He pushed his way through the crowd, his heart a cold stone in his chest. The scene was one of contained chaos. The street was blocked off. Pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, the water-wielding Backdraft, were holding the line, but they were ineffective. And there, in the center of it all, was the same sludge villain from the tunnel. It had found a new host. A host with blonde, spiky hair and red, terrified eyes. It was Bakugo. Kaken was trapped, just as he had been. The villain was using his explosion quirk, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts, creating a maelstrom of smoke and debris that kept the heroes at bay. Death Arms was strong, but he couldn't get a grip. Kamui Woods was vulnerable to the fire. Izuku watched, frozen. He saw the look in Bakugo's eyes. It wasn't the arrogant, confident glare he was used to. It was the same wild, primal terror he had felt in the tunnel. It was the look of someone drowning, and in that moment, something shifted inside Izuku Midoriya. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. His meticulous brain, his analytical mind, shut down completely. All that was left was a feeling, a raw, overwhelming, all-consuming empathy that connected him to the boy in the sludge. He felt Bakugo's suffocating terror, his desperate rage, his humiliation. He saw not the bully who had tormented him for years, but a person who needed saving. He's in trouble. He needs help. I have to save him. His legs moved before his brain could protest. He burst through the police line, a small, green-haired blur of motion. Kid, no! Get back here! Death Arms shouted. The world seemed to slow down. He could hear the heroes yelling, the crowd gasping. He saw Bakugo's eyes widen in disbelief as he ran toward him. He had no plan. He had no quirk. He was a useless, worthless Deku. But his legs kept moving. What do I do? What can I do? His brain, finally rebooting, latched onto the only thing it could. My notebook. Page 25. Kamui Woods. His preemptive binding lacquered chain prison. No, the terrain is wrong. All Might. He would punch. I can't do that. He fumbled with his backpack, swinging it off his shoulder. It was a stupid, desperate gesture. Kaken! He screamed, his voice raw. He threw the backpack at the villain. A pencil case flew out and struck the monster in the eye. It was just enough. The villain flinched, its grip on Bakugo's mouth loosening for a fraction of a second. Kaken! Bakugo gasped, taking in a ragged breath. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? He roared, a mixture of fury and fear. I don't know. Izuku cried, clawing at the sludge, just as he had done for himself. My legs they just started moving. You looked like you needed saving. It was useless. His hand sank into the slime, finding no purchase. The villain laughed, a horrible, wet sound. You again? Came back for more, huh? A real hero complex on this one. It reared up, a slimy pseudopod forming to swat Izuku away like a fly. This was it. He was going to die. But this time, he wasn't alone. And he wasn't afraid. In this final, crystallized moment, all that existed was the overwhelming, impossible desire. Save him. I have to save him. I have to save Kaken. Let him go. Just let him go. Please. Make it stop. The desire was not a thought. It was a prayer. It was a command issued to the universe itself from the deepest wellspring of his being. It was the most powerful, singular emotion Izuku Midoriya had ever felt in his 14 years of life. And for the first time, reality listened. There was no explosion. No flash of light. No shockwave. The change was silent, subtle, and profoundly, fundamentally wrong. The pressure on Izuku vanished. The suffocating stench of sewage and burnt sugar was replaced by a soft, clean, floral scent. The gurgling screams of the villain and Bakugo's defiant shouts simply ceased. Izuku blinked. The massive, terrifying sludge villain was gone. In its place, millions upon millions of delicate, five-petaled cherry blossoms were materializing from thin air. They didn't fall from above. They bloomed into existence where the sludge had been, a silent, swirling blizzard of impossible pink and white. They cascaded down, blanketing the street, clinging to the lampposts, and settling in Bakugo's hair. Bakugo fell to his knees, coughing and gasping for air, staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes at the petal that landed on his hand. The heroes stood frozen, their jaws agape. The crowd was utterly silent, 1,000 people witnessing a miracle they could not process. Izuku stood in the eye of the beautiful, impossible storm, his arms still outstretched. He looked at his hand, then at Bakugo, then at the swirling petals. A wave of exhaustion, so profound it felt like a physical blow, washed over him. His head swam. A thin trickle of blood dripped from his nose, the world tilted on its axis, the edges of his vision turning a fuzzy, static gray. He saw the shocked face of All Might finally arriving on the scene, but the image was distant, unimportant. The last thing he felt before darkness consumed him was a gnawing, terrifying question that echoed in the silent ruins of his mind. What did I just do? Thousands of miles away, in a sprawling mansion in Westchester County, New York, the quiet hum of sophisticated machinery was shattered by a piercing, discordant shriek. In the subterranean chamber known as Cerebro, Professor Charles Xavier's head snapped up from his meditation. His calm, blue eyes shot open, wide with alarm. Beside him, a young woman with fiery red hair, Jean Grey, cried out and clutched her temples, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. "Professor!" she exclaimed, her voice tight. What was that? The semi-spherical room around them, lined with circuits and conduits, pulsed with a frantic, chaotic light. The main holographic display, which usually showed a serene globe dotted with the faint psychic lights of the world's mutant population, was whited out, consumed by a raging, crimson storm centered directly over Japan. "Cerebro analysis," Xavier commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. His hands flew over the console, trying to filter the impossible flood of data. / energy signature, undefined. / psionic output, immeasurable. Feedback loop imminent. / reality metrics, critical stress. Ontological anchors unstable. Ontological anchors? Xavier breathed, his brow furrowed in disbelief. This was not a power surge. This was not a psychic phenomenon. This was the very fabric of physics screaming in agony. "Jean, can you get a lock? Try to filter out the raw power. Focus on the source. The mind behind it." Jean closed her eyes, her face pale and beaded with sweat. She extended her psychic senses across the globe, pushing past the deafening static. For a moment she found it, a single point of consciousness at the heart of the storm. She reached for it, and was immediately slammed by a psychic tidal wave so powerful it threw her back in her chair. She wasn't assailed by thoughts, but by pure, unfiltered, primal emotion. It was a psychic scream of 1,000 contradictions. The crushing weight of a lifetime of inadequacy. The blinding, desperate light of absolute, selfless heroism. Overwhelming terror. Crippling shame. A desperate prayer to save someone, tangled with a deep, dark wish to simply cease to exist. It was the emotional profile of a martyr and a victim, a god and an insect, all at once. She saw a fleeting, fractured image, a boy with a shock of untamable green hair, his face streaked with tears and grime, his wide, freckled eyes filled with a terror so profound it was holy. I felt him. Jean gasped, clutching her chest. "Professor, it was a child. A boy. He was so scared. And so powerful." Xavier stared at the crimson storm on the display, which was slowly receding, leaving behind a deep, pulsing scar on the map. He had seen powerful mutants. He had faced Magneto, stood against Apocalypse. But this was different. This wasn't a mutant who controlled energy or matter. This was something that had, for a brief, terrifying moment, told reality what to be, and reality had obeyed. It wasn't an activation. It was an awakening. "This is not a simple manifestation, Jean," Professor Xavier said, his voice grim, laced with an awe that bordered on fear. "This is an inception." He looked at the lingering signature, a beacon of chaotic potential now burning quietly where moments before it had raged. "We have found a new Omega-level mutant," he declared, the weight of the words settling in the silent room. And I fear he has absolutely no idea what he is. The shriek of Cerebro was not a sound of mechanical failure. It was the sound of a violin string being tightened past its breaking point, a pure, harmonic scream of something fundamental being pushed beyond its limits. It resonated not just in the air of the subterranean chamber, but directly within the minds of the two powerful telepaths present. Professor Charles Xavier's serene meditation was shattered. He sat bolt upright in his custom wheelchair, his hands gripping the armrests, his placid features taut with an alarm he had not felt in years. Beside him, Jean Grey cried out, a sharp, pained gasp, as she recoiled from the psychic console. Her chair rolled back several feet, and she pressed the heels of her palms into her temples as if to physically contain the psychic onslaught. Professor! She managed, her voice strained. The air around her seemed to shimmer, a faint corona of pinkish-gold psionic energy bleeding from her overloaded senses. The feedback, it's immense. The semi-spherical room, a marvel of sheer technology and mutant ingenuity, was in revolt. The holographic globe at its center, normally a tranquil blue sphere dotted with the quiet lights of mutant signatures, was now a roiling ball of crimson fire. Data streams, usually flowing in orderly cascades, scrolled across the displays in an unreadable, panicked frenzy. / warning, reality metrics exceeding safe parameters. / ontological stress index, 9.8/10.0. / psionic event classification, transcendent. Xavier's mind, a fortress of discipline and unparalleled power, worked furiously to erect psychic barriers, not just to protect himself, but to shield the more sensitive students in the mansion above from the psychic shockwave. Cerebro, stabilize! Isolate the event signature and filter the backlash. He didn't need the machine to tell him the location. He could feel it, a psychic wound torn in the fabric of the world, centered on a dense urban sprawl in Japan. Muzudafu. The energy was not the focus, cutting beam of a power like Cyclops' optic blasts, nor the majestic, elemental fury of storm. It wasn't even the brutal, systematic warping of a force like Magneto's command over electromagnetism. This was something else entirely. This was a reality tremor, a deep, foundational shudder, as if someone had plucked the bass string of the universe and let loose a dissonant chord. Heavy, metallic footsteps echoed rapidly on the gantry leading into the chamber. The pneumatic door hissed open, revealing two figures. The first was broad and powerfully built, his face obscured by a ruby quartz visor. Scott Summers, Cyclops, the X-Men's field leader. His posture was rigid, all business. Behind him, a massive figure ducked under the doorframe, his blue-furred form moving with an incongruous, feline grace. Dr. Hank McCoy the Beast, his brilliant mind housed in an animalistic frame, peered at the chaotic displays through his spectacles. Charles? Jean? Scott's voice was clipped, professional. We felt that all the way in the war room. What was it? A psychic attack? If it was, Hank rumbled, his deep voice filled with a scientist's awe. It was an attack launched with the psionic equivalent of a supernova. The sheer energy readings are, well, they're frankly nonsensical. He adjusted his glasses, his keen eyes scanning the frantic data. These aren't readings from a telepath or a telekinetic. This is a quantum waveform collapse on a macro scale. The laws of causality in that localized area appear to have taken a brief holiday. Xavier's brow was deeply furrowed. The event was triggered by an individual, Hank. But the power itself, it seems to be born of pure, undiluted emotion. He turned his gaze to Jean, who was slowly regaining her composure, her breathing still shaky. Jean, what did you feel? Jean took a deep breath, her green eyes haunted. I tried to make contact. To find the source mind. I pushed past the static and I touched it. She shuddered. Professor, it was like diving into an ocean of feeling. A tsunami. There were no coherent thoughts, no language. Just raw sensation. She closed her eyes, trying to articulate the impossible. I felt crippling inadequacy, a shame so deep it felt like a physical weight, and right alongside it, a desperate, burning desire to be a hero, so pure and bright it was painful. Terror, the kind you feel when you're drowning. And then, a plea. A prayer. A single, overwhelming command to the universe to make it stop. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And for a second, I saw him. Just a flash. A boy. Young, maybe 14 or 15. Green hair, freckles, and his eyes were full of tears. She looked at the others, her own eyes wide with a mixture of pity and fear. He didn't know what he was doing. I'm certain of it. He was just feeling. Scott crossed his arms, his expression unreadable behind his visor. A boy who can do that just by feeling? What did he do? Hank answered, pointing a blue-furred finger at a stabilized data window. According to satellite imagery and energy residue analysis, he transmuted approximately 2.5 metric tons of a semi-liquid, sentient biomass into Prunus serrulata petals. He paused, letting the absurdity sink in. Cherry blossoms. He perceived a threat and, through an act of sheer, desperate will, rewrote it into something harmless and beautiful. The physics of such a transformation are, well, they're not physics at all, Charles. They're poetry. Frightening, world-breaking poetry. Xavier's face was grim. This was worse than he could have imagined. A reality warper was the most dangerous classification of mutant, a being who could reshape the world to their whim, but one who was unconscious of his power. One whose reality bending was tied directly to the tumultuous, unstable emotions of adolescence. That was a walking, ticking apocalypse. He is an Omega level, Xavier stated, the words landing with immense gravity. Perhaps the most powerful potential we have ever encountered. He looked at the map, at the now quiet signature in Muzidifu. And he is utterly alone with a power that could unravel creation with a single, heartfelt wish. Izuku Midoriya felt like a fraud. He sat on the edge of his bed, the all-might-themed comforter, a juvenile mockery of his current state. The official story, the one repeated by the news anchors and the pro-heroes who had given their statements, was simple. While the local heroes had the sludge villain contained, All Might had arrived in the nick of time, smashing the villain to bits with a single, mighty punch. The strange blizzard of cherry blossoms was attributed to a new, unnamed hero with a botanical quirk who had assisted and then vanished, a minor footnote in the tale of All Might's greatness. Izuku himself had been rescued from the crowd, a reckless civilian who had foolishly endangered himself. The heroes on the scene had berated him for his stupidity, while Bakugo received praise for his resilience and powerful quirk. The paramedics had checked him over, pronounced him shaken but unharmed, and sent him home with his mother. His mother. Inko Midoriya had wept, clutching him so tightly he could barely breathe. She apologized over and over, for his quirklessness, for the danger he'd been in, for a world that was so unkind. He had simply stood there, numb, and let her. He didn't tell her what really happened. How could he? Mom, I think I turned a villain into flowers by wishing really hard. They would have sent him to a psychiatric hospital, so he clung to the lie. It was a shield against the truth he couldn't bear to face. But in the quiet of his room, the shield was full of holes. He remembered the feeling, the desperate wish, and the silent, instantaneous response. It hadn't been All Might. It hadn't been another hero. It had been him. He looked at his hands. They were just hands. Pale, a little callous from years of gripping a pencil too tightly. They held no power. He flexed his fingers, concentrating, trying to feel for that thing inside him. Nothing. He tried to summon the overwhelming empathy he'd felt for Bakugo. Nothing. It was gone, leaving behind only the hollow echo of terror. Maybe I imagined it, he thought, a desperate lifeline. Maybe I was hysterical. Maybe the stress and lack of oxygen made me hallucinate. It was a comforting thought, but it didn't last. The next morning, his paranoia was a physical itch under his skin. He felt watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. He flinched at loud noises. At breakfast, his mother slid a plate of tamagoyaki in front of him, her eyes still puffy from crying the night before. Izuku, honey, she said softly. I was thinking, maybe Yui isn't the only path. There are so many ways to be a hero. You could be a police officer or a doctor. The gentle words felt like a judgment. A confirmation of his failure. A spike of bitter disappointment and shame shot through him. Even my own mom has given up on me. He reached for his glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. His fingers fumbled, and the glass slipped. Time seemed to stutter. The glass, half full, stopped its descent an inch above the wooden floor. Water sloshed in zero gravity, a wobbling, crystalline sphere held in place by an invisible hand. Izuku stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. His mind was a blank slate of pure panic. No, 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 no. The intense focus of his panic was the only thing holding the glass in place. It was his desperate desire not to make a mess, not to give his mother one more thing to worry about. Izuku? His mother asked, her voice tinged with concern. Are you all right? You look pale. Her voice broke his concentration. The invisible force vanished. The glass and the sphere of water obeyed gravity with a sudden, violent finality. It shattered on the floor, water splashing across the wood. Oh! Inko exclaimed, jumping up to get a towel. Don't worry about it, sweetie. It's just a glass. But Izuku couldn't move. He stared at the puddle and the glittering shards, his breathing shallow. It had happened again. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. And it was tied to him. To his feelings. He spent the rest of the day locked in his room, feigning a headache. He needed a new notebook. His hero analysis series was for documenting the quantifiable, the understandable. This was something else. He found a plain, black-covered notebook he'd once bought for a class he'd dropped, its pages stark white and empty. He sat at his desk, the pen feeling alien in his hand. He labeled the first page, Anomaly Analysis, Number 1. He started with the facts as he knew them. Event 1, Sludge Villain Incident. Trigger, extreme emotional distress. Overwhelming empathic connection to K. Bakugo. Singular, focused desire to save him. Manifestation, transmutation of hostile entity into non-hostile, organic matter, cherry blossoms. Mass and volume appeared conserved, but state of matter and biological composition radically altered. Physical sensation, extreme exhaustion, nosebleed, loss of consciousness. Result, threat neutralized. Side effects, temporary, localized suspension of disbelief. He paused, his own handwriting looking like that of a stranger. This was insane. It sounded like something out of a comic book, not a scientific analysis. Event 2, Dropped Glass Incident. Trigger, spike of minor panic. Focused desire to prevent an accident, spilling water, making a mess. Manifestation, localized, temporary gravitational negation. Object held in stasis. Effect broke when focus was lost. Result, accident delayed, not prevented. No noticeable physical sensation. He was a walking catastrophe. His emotions, which he had always felt so keenly, his boundless empathy, his crippling anxiety, his soaring hopes and crushing despair, were no longer just feelings. They were weapons. And he had no idea how to disarm them. That evening, a news report rehashed the sludge villain incident. They showed a phone camera clip of him rushing in. An eyewitness was being interviewed. Absolutely reckless, the woman was saying, shaking her head. The heroes had it under control. That boy just got in the way and made things worse. A hot flush of shame and anger burned in Izuku's chest. I didn't make it worse. I was the one who. A loud groan followed by a sharp bang echoed from the living room. The water pipe running along the ceiling had burst, spraying water all over the floor. His mother shrieked in surprise. Izuku stared at the wall separating his room from the living room, his blood running cold. He hadn't touched it. He was 10 feet away. But he had felt that flash of anger. The pipe hadn't just burst from pressure. It had been twisted, a section of the copper looking warped and sheared, as if an invisible giant had squeezed it. He slowly added a new entry to his black notebook. Event 3, Water Pipe Incident. Trigger, sudden, intense anger and shame in response to public criticism. Manifestation, spontaneous structural failure of nearby metal plumbing. Appears to be a kinetic/telekinetic expression of emotional frustration. Conclusion, he wrote, his hand shaking so badly the letters were barely legible. I have no control. My power is reactive. It responds to my strongest feelings. I am a danger to everyone around me. He closed the notebook. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya, the boy who dreamed of nothing but being a hero, was terrified of himself. Back in the cool, sterile quiet of Cerebro, the globe was no longer a storm of crimson. It was a placid blue, with one significant, persistent anomaly. The signature in Muzurifu, Japan, still pulsed. It was no longer screaming, but it was muttering. The initial event has subsided, Hank reported, adjusting his glasses as he studied a new set of readouts. But the source remains highly unstable. I'm detecting nigh imperceptible reality fluctuations emanating from the same location. Micro-events. I can feel them, Jean added softly. She was now sitting calmly at the console, her mind delicately attuned to the distant boy. They're like psychic tremors, a spike of anxiety, and for a nanosecond, the probability of a car crash on his street increases by 50%. A wave of sadness, and the atmospheric pressure in his immediate vicinity drops. He's bleeding reality, Charles. Constantly, Xavier's face was a mask of grave concentration. This confirmed his worst fears. The boy was not a dormant volcano. He was a leaky nuclear reactor. The large-scale event had been the initial meltdown, but now he was constantly poisoning his immediate reality with low-level chaotic energy. Left unchecked, he could inadvertently cause untold destruction without ever meaning to. Or worse, someone could learn to provoke him, to use his emotional instability as a weapon. A being like All for One in Japan, or even their own Magneto, would see this boy not as a person, but as the ultimate tool of creation or destruction. He cannot be left alone, Scott said, his voice firm. He had come to the same conclusion. The risk is too great. We need to bring him in. A full team. Myself, Storm, Colossus. We go in hard and fast, neutralize him before he can react, and bring him back for containment. A frontal assault would be tantamount to poking a sleeping god with a very sharp stick, Scott. Hank countered, shaking his head. His power is reactive. If he perceives us as a threat, his response would be reflexive and, I suspect, catastrophic. Imagine him feeling threatened by the X-Men. He might wish we never existed, and Cerebro's readouts suggest he might just get his wish. Hank is right, Jean said, turning to Scott. And he's a child. He's terrified. Can you imagine what a full-force extraction would do to him? We can't treat him like a villain. We have to approach him as friends. As people who want to help. Xavier listened to his senior members, his mind weighing the terrible options. Scott's tactical assessment was sound from a risk management perspective. Hank's scientific caution was equally valid, but Jean's empathy touched upon the heart of the matter. The power was tied to emotion. Therefore, the solution must also be emotional. Jean is correct, Xavier finally announced, his voice commanding silence. We will not approach him as an army. We will not go to contain a threat. We will go to rescue a boy who is a prisoner of his own power. He looked at his team, his gaze resolute. This will be a mission of first contact, not of containment. Our goal is observation, gentle approach, and persuasion. We must earn his trust. He turned the strategic problem over in his mind. Who was best suited for such a delicate operation? They needed stealth, non-aggression, and the ability to de-escalate. The team will be small, he decided. 2 members. We need stealth and a non-threatening presence. His eyes fell on the roster in his mind. Kurt Wagner, he said aloud. Scott raised an eyebrow. Nightcrawler? Charles, his appearance is precisely the point, Xavier countered. Kurt has faced prejudice and fear his entire life because of how he looks. He understands what it is to be judged as a monster. He is also one of our most compassionate and gentle souls. If anyone can see past the boy's power to the fear beneath, it is Kurt. And the second member? Jean asked. Someone to ground the situation. Someone who can get close without triggering a panic. A power that is inherently defensive, non-violent. He smiled faintly. Someone who can literally walk through walls, Kitty cried. Hank nodded in approval. An excellent choice. Her phasing ability is the very definition of non-confrontational, and her youthful demeanor may help put the subject at ease. Scott still looked skeptical, but he deferred to the professor's judgment. And the mission parameters? Observe from a distance. Assess his psychological state, Xavier instructed. When the moment is right, make contact. Explain who we are. Show him he is not a monster, and that he is not alone. Offer him a place here, at the Institute. A place where he can learn, and a place where he will be safe. He paused, his expression becoming deadly serious. But you will impress upon them the absolute priority. Do not provoke him. Do not frighten him. The future may very well depend on how this first conversation goes. The decision was made. In the heart of the Xavier Institute, a mission was launched, not with the roar of the Blackbird's jets, but with the quiet hum of a teleporter and the whisper of a girl who could walk through walls. They were heading to Japan, on a quest to find a boy named Izuku Midoriya, unaware that they were not just retrieving a new student, but approaching the epicenter of a storm that had the power to remake the world. The scent of ozone and brimstone, a smell as familiar to the X-Men as the scent of freshly cut grass, filled a quiet corner of the mansion's transport hangar. It was the signature after-effect of Kurt Wagner's teleportation, a brief, sulphurous tear in the fabric of space. Kurt himself materialized with a soft BMF, his blue-furred, three-fingered hands clasped in front of him, his yellow eyes glowing with a gentle incandescence. His demonic appearance, complete with a prehensile, spade-tipped tail that twitched nervously behind him, belied a nature that was more priestly than fiendish. A moment later, a young woman with a cascade of brown hair seemed to simply step out of the solid wall beside him. Kitty Pryde, clad in a simple, nondescript civilian outfit of jeans and a hoodie, solidified with a faint shimmer, a wry smile on her face. At 16, she was the youngest active member of the team, but her mastery over her phasing ability was second to none. "You know, Kurt," she said, dusting off her shoulders theatrically. "One of these days you're going to give me a little warning before you jump." I nearly phased us into the middle of the Blackbird's port engine. Kurt's smile was wide, revealing a set of gleaming white fangs. "ACH, main Skatchen, where's your sense of adventure? Besides," he added, his German accent coloring his words, Professor Xavier's coordinates were most precise. We are exactly where he intended. Their location was an unremarkable rooftop in the Musudafu district. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over a sprawling city of glass towers, traditional tiled roofs, and endless, winding streets. The air was thick with the sounds of urban life, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing train, the murmur of 1,000 voices. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of Westchester. Kitty pulled a small, sleek device from her pocket. It resembled a smartphone, but its screen displayed a complex energy map of the surrounding area, with a single, faint pulse at its center. A gift from Forge, it was a localized version of Cerebro's detection system, tuned to the specific chaotic energy of their target. "Okay, he's close," Kitty said, her voice dropping to a more professional tone. "The signal is weak, but steady. It's coming from that direction." She pointed towards a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and residential buildings a few blocks away. "The professor said to observe first. Let's find a better vantage point." Kurt nodded, his expression serious now. He understood the gravity of their mission. This wasn't about fighting Sentinels or thwarting Magneto. This was about reaching a scared child before his fear could break the world. His own past, a life spent as a circus freak, hunted by terrified villagers, gave him a unique and painful insight into what this boy must be feeling. With a flick of his tail for balance, Kurt leaped from the rooftop, his acrobatic prowess carrying him silently across the gap to the next building. Kitty followed, simply running through the air for a few steps before letting gravity take hold, her fall broken by a controlled phase through the edge of the next rooftop. They moved like ghosts through the urban landscape, two strange guardian angels closing in on their unwitting charge. They found him in a small, forgotten park tucked between towering apartment complexes. It was a sad little square of dirt and patchy grass, with a single rusty swing set and a dying ginkgo tree. And there, sitting cross-legged beneath the tree, was the boy from Jean's psychic vision, Izuku Midoriya. He looked smaller in person, almost swallowed by his bright yellow backpack. His green hair was an unruly mop, and his shoulders were slumped in a posture of perpetual apology. He was utterly, painfully alone. In his hand he held a single ginkgo leaf, its fan shape a brilliant yellow against his pale skin. He was staring at it with an intensity that was almost frightening. From their perch on a nearby fire escape, Kurt and Kitty watched. "He's trying to control it," Kurt whispered, his voice barely a breath of air. Kitty nodded, her eyes wide. As Izuku focused, the leaf in his hand began to tremble. It lifted from his palm, hovering a few inches in the air. It was a small, delicate miracle, a tiny act of defiance against the laws of physics. Izuku's face was a mask of sheer concentration, sweat beading on his forehead. The leaf wobbled, dipped, then shot up a foot, its movement mirroring the boy's frustrated sigh. It's tied to his breath, his concentration, Kitty observed. He's trying to find the switch. The internal muscle for his power. They watched for nearly 20 minutes as Izuku practiced. He managed to make the leaf float, to spin it in a slow circle, to make it dance in the air. Each small success was met with a flicker of hope in his eyes, each failure with a wave of palpable despair that even they, non-telepaths, could almost feel. During one moment of frustration, the swing set behind him buckled slightly, its metal groaning as if under immense weight. Izuku flinched, his head snapping around, his concentration broken. The leaf fell from the air. He buried his face in his hands, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. Kurt's heart ached for him. This was not a monster. This was a child being tortured by a gift he hadn't asked for and couldn't understand. It's time, Kurt said softly. He is at his lowest ebb. A show of aggression now would shatter him. We must be gentle. What's the plan? Kitty asked. No tricks. No hiding in the shadows, Kurt decided. We walk in. We greet him as a friend. We show him we are not afraid, so he has no reason to be afraid of us. Kitty took a deep breath. Okay. Gentle. Got it. They dropped from the fire escape, landing silently in the alley behind the park. They smoothed their clothes, composed themselves, and stepped out from the mouth of the alley into the small park. Izuku didn't notice them at first. His head was still in his hands. The sound of their footsteps on the gravel path made him look up, and his world tilted on its axis. Standing before him were two figures straight out of a nightmare or a fantasy. The man was tall and slender, covered in dark blue fur, with glowing yellow eyes, pointed ears, and a long, devilish tail. The girl beside him looked normal enough, but she had an air of impossible confidence, and he hadn't heard them approach at all. They hadn't made a sound. Izuku's mind, already afraid not of paranoia and fear, snapped. They found me. The thought wasn't a suspicion, it was a certainty. They weren't heroes. They weren't police. Heroes announced themselves. These people, they moved in the shadows. Their appearance was strange, outlandish. They had to be villains, like the sludge monster. Or worse. Government agents. The kind from the conspiracy theories he read online, the ones who dissected people with strange powers to see what made them tick. They had seen what he could do. They were here to take him away. He scrambled backwards, crab walking away from them, his yellow backpack a useless shield. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Who are you? What do you want? Kurt held up his hands in a universal gesture of peace. His kind, warm smile was meant to be disarming, but to Izuku's panicked mind, the sight of his sharp fangs was a terrifying threat. Guten Tag, young man, Kurt said, his voice soft and melodic. Please do not be alarmed. We are not here to harm you. My name is Kurt Wagner, and this is my friend Kitty Pride. We just want to talk, Kitty added, her voice carefully neutral. She took a half step forward. It was the wrong move. Izuku's panic went into overdrive. The desperate, primal need to get away, to not be caught, surged through him. It was the same feeling he'd had in the alley with the sludge villain, but now it was sharper, more focused. It wasn't a vague plea to be saved. It was a specific, terrified command. I don't want them near me. Make them go away. The world obeyed. The ground beneath Kurt and Kitty's feet seemed to liquefy. It wasn't an earthquake. The solid concrete of the park's path rippled like a disturbed pond. They stumbled, their feet sinking into the now malleable pavement as if it were quicksand. Kurt! Kitty yelled, her training kicking in. She went intangible, her body becoming ghostly and translucent, expecting to fall through the ground. But this wasn't a normal physical phenomenon. The reality of the pavement itself was in flux. Phasing through it was like trying to phase through a concept that was actively rewriting itself. A searing, white-hot pain shot through Kitty's body. It felt like every molecule of her being was being pulled in a different direction at once. She screamed, a raw sound of agony, and solidified, collapsing to her knees, her hands still half sunk in the rippling concrete. "Kitty!" Kurt cried out, his demonic features contorted in alarm. He tried to teleport, to BMF them both to safety. He vanished in his signature puff of brimstone, but something went terribly wrong. The spatial coordinates he had locked onto, the rooftop a few blocks away, were no longer stable. The fabric of space he was trying to traverse was warped, twisted by the boy's unintentional reality bending. Instead of a clean jump, he was dragged through a nauseating, non-Euclidean vortex. He felt a tearing sensation, a violent pull on his very essence. He rematerialized 20 feet away, not on the rooftop, but in the middle of the alleyway they had just left. He crashed into a brick wall, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He lay there, dazed and disoriented, the world spinning. His teleportation, an extension of his own body, had never betrayed him like that. It had felt violated. The alley itself was no longer a stable corridor. The brick walls on either side began to ripple like fabric hanging on a clothesline. The perspective skewed wildly. The end of the alley, which should have been 50 feet away, suddenly looked miles distant, a pinprick of light. Then it rushed towards them, the distance collapsing in an instant. Izuku was on his feet, his eyes wide with terror, not at them, but at what he was doing. He wasn't controlling this. He was a passenger in his own chaotic storm. "Stay back," he shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. "Just leave me alone." His plea for solitude became a command. Gravity, in the localized area of the alley, inverted. Kurt and Kitty were yanked off the ground, not upwards but sideways, as if the wall had suddenly become the floor. Kurt scrambled for purchase on the shifting brickwork, his claws finding no hold on the fluid surface. Kitty, still reeling from the pain of her failed phase, was helpless. They were being pulled, not towards the sky, but towards the center of the warped alley, where the air itself seemed to be folding in on itself. "We have to get out! Now!" Kurt yelled. He wrapped his prehensile tail around Kitty's waist, pulling her close. He ignored the screaming disorientation, the feeling of space being turned inside out. He focused his will, drawing on every ounce of his training and faith, and forced another teleport. BMF. This time, the jump was successful, but brutal. They materialized in a heap on the rooftop where their journey had begun, a chaotic tumble of blue fur and flailing limbs. They lay there, gasping for breath, the sounds of the city rushing back in to fill the silence. Kitty was trembling, her face pale. "Kurt, my powers!" He twisted them. It felt like I was being erased. Kurt pushed himself into a sitting position, his body aching. He looked at his own three-fingered hands, which were still tingling with the memory of spatial distortion. His fear, main scatchen, it does not just lash out. It rewrites the rules. He did not attack us. He simply wished we were gone, and reality itself tried to grant his wish. He looked back towards the park. The alley was returning to normal, the bricks solidifying, the perspective snapping back into place. The faint, chaotic energy signature was spiking erratically, then rapidly fading as the boy, presumably, fled the scene. Their mission was an unmitigated disaster. The soft approach had failed spectacularly. They hadn't just failed to gain his trust, they had confirmed his deepest fears. They had presented themselves as potential saviors and, through his own terrifying power, had been turned into victims. Kurt activated his communicator, his voice grim. "Professor Xavier. This is Nightcrawler. Do you read me?" The reply was instantaneous, Xavier's telepathic voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of extreme concern. "I read you, Kurt. I felt the spatial distortion. Report. Are you and Kitty all right?" "We are alive, Professor," Kurt said, his voice heavy. "But the mission is a failure. He perceived us as a threat. His defensive reaction was beyond anything we anticipated. He does not control a force, he is the force. We cannot reason with a hurricane." He relayed the events, the rippling ground, Kitty's pain, the nightmarish teleport. He described the look on the boy's face, not malice, not anger, but pure, unadulterated terror. Back in Cerebro, Xavier listened, his hands steepled before him, his expression growing more grave with every word. Scott and Hank stood by, their earlier debate now seeming terrifyingly prescient. He turned your own powers against you, unintentionally. Xavier mused, his mind processing the terrifying implications. His reality warping isn't just external. It's invasive. It targeted the very nature of your mutant abilities. Professor, a soft approach is no longer viable, Kurt stated, the regret in his voice palpable. We have only succeeded in making him more frightened, more unstable. The next time he is cornered, he may not just create a localized distortion. He may delete something. Permanently. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. The problem of Izukumitariya had just escalated exponentially. He was no longer a mutant in need of help. He was a potential global threat, a walking containment breach whose trigger was his own well-meaning, terrified heart. What are your orders, Charles? Scott asked, his voice low. The time for gentleness was over. Xavier closed his eyes. He had wanted to save the boy. He still did. But his primary responsibility was to the world, to both humans and mutants. He could not risk a catastrophe born of a teenager's panic attack. He had hoped to avoid this, to treat the boy as a student, a person. But the power was too great, the instability too profound. With a heavy heart, he made the decision he had been dreading. The boy could not be persuaded. He had to be contained. Xavier's telepathic voice reached out across the continents, not just to Kurt and Kitty, but to the other members of his core team. It was a voice devoid of its usual warmth, replaced by a grim, sorrowful authority. Kurt, Kitty, your mission is terminated. Return to the Institute immediately for medical evaluation. He paused, the weight of his next words feeling like a physical burden. Scott, Ororo, Logan, Jean, prep the Blackbird. Your new mission is containment. The subject's designation is now Paragon. Your orders are to subdue and retrieve, by any means necessary. The risk of inaction is too high. In the mansion, Wolverine, who had been listening from the doorway of the war room, let out a low growl. He popped his claws with a sharp snick, the sound of adamantium slicing through the air a deadly punctuation mark to the professor's command. Storm's eyes glowed with a faint white light as she began to mentally scan global weather patterns. Cyclops simply nodded, his hand going to his visor, his mind already running through tactical scenarios. Jean Grey, however, looked at the professor, her expression filled with sadness. Charles, are you sure? He's just a boy. He is a boy holding a loaded gun with a hair trigger, pointed at the entire world. Xavier replied, his voice etched with sorrow. And he doesn't even know his finger is on the trigger. We are not going to hunt a child, Jean. We are going to disarm a bomb. Pray that we can do so without causing it to detonate. Miles away, Izukumitariya ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just ran, his lungs burning, his legs screaming, his yellow backpack bouncing wildly on his shoulders. He careened through unfamiliar streets, pushing past startled pedestrians, his mind a white-hot mess of terror. They found me, they found me, they found me. The alleyway had twisted. The ground had turned to water. The demonic-looking man and the girl, he had hurt them. He had felt it. He had wanted them to go away, and reality had contorted itself to make it happen. He'd seen the pain on the girl's face, the disorientation of the man. He hadn't attacked them, but he had violated them with his fear. He finally stumbled into a deserted underpass, the same one where he had first encountered the sludge villain. He collapsed against the cold, grimy wall, sliding to the ground, his body trembling uncontrollably. He was a monster. It was true. Kakin was right. Everyone was right. He was a freak, a danger, something that shouldn't exist. He pulled the black notebook, Anomaly Analysis, from his bag. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. Event 4, Park Incident. Trigger, extreme panic. Fear of capture by unknown agents, villains? Government? Manifestation, multiple, simultaneous reality warping events. Ground liquefaction. Spatial distortion. Gravitational inversion. Hostile interference with attackers' quirks. Result, attackers repelled. I hurt them. He was no longer just a danger to his mother or his apartment. He was a danger to everyone. Those people, whoever they were powerful, and he had twisted them up like pretzels with nothing but his own cowardice. He was being hunted. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. And they wouldn't send a gentle team next time. Next time, they would come to put him down. He looked around the empty underpass, at the shadows clinging to the corners. He was on the run now. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to school. He was an outcast in a world he so desperately wanted to be a part of. He was completely, utterly alone. The tears he had been holding back finally came, hot and silent. He curled into a ball, clutching his knees to his chest, a solitary, weeping boy in the dark, unaware that halfway across the world, a sleek, black jet was being prepared, its destination his city, its cargo a team of the most powerful mutants on the planet, their mission to capture him before his next terror could drown the world. The hunt had begun. The decision, once made, settled over the Xavier Institute like a shroud. The usual atmosphere of academic curiosity and youthful energy was replaced by a grim, operational silence. Professor Xavier's order to escalate had shifted Izukamiteria's status in their files from case file, M177, prospective student, to threat designation, Omega Paragon, containment priority alpha. It was a cold, clinical change that felt like a betrayal of their core principles, a necessary evil that left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The new team assembled not in a classroom, but in the sterile, metallic confines of the Blackbird's hangar. The jet itself sat like a dormant predator, its sleek, black fuselage absorbing the hangar lights. The air smelled of jet fuel and focused tension. Scott Summers, Cyclops, stood before a holographic tactical display, his arms crossed, his ruby quartz visor catching the light. The display showed a detailed map of Muzutafu, with concentric circles radiating from the last known location of their target. His last confirmed position was in the Chiota ward, but the energy signature vanished 63 minutes ago. He's in the wind. Beside him, Aurora Monroe Storm stood with regal poise, her white hair a stark contrast to her dark uniform. Her eyes, the color of a clear sky, were distant, as if she were already feeling the atmospheric pressures and humidity of a city thousands of miles away. The emotional residue he left behind is chaotic, she said, her voice like a low, resonant hum. It poisons the air. The barometric pressure in that area is still fluctuating erratically. It is like a small, localized anxiety storm. Leaning against the Blackbird's landing strut, whittling a piece of wood into a sharp point with a single, extended claw, was Logan. Wolverine's expression was a familiar scowl, but his posture radiated a tense stillness. He didn't like this. Not one bit. So we're going after a kid who throws a tantrum and accidentally rewrites the zip code, he grumbled, not looking up. What's the play, Scott? We surround him and sing Kumbaya until he calms down? The play, Scott said, his voice cutting through the sarcasm, is precision and overwhelming force, applied sequentially. This isn't a knockout brawl, Logan. This is surgery. He tapped the display, highlighting a 4-person combat roster. Phase 1 is location. Gene, you're on point. Once we're in Japanese airspace, you'll use the Blackbird's amplification systems, a sort of mini-cerebro, to get a lock on his psychic signature. Not his power, his mind. We need to find the boy, not the storm. Jean Grey nodded, her face pale but determined. She wore her green and gold X-Men uniform, but her expression was more like that of a worried doctor than a soldier. I'll do my best. His emotional state is so volatile, it creates a lot of psychic static. It's like trying to find one specific voice screaming in a stadium full of people. Once we have a location, Scott continued, Phase 2 begins. Storm, you create a wide perimeter environmental containment field. A dense, circular fog bank, non-threatening, but it will obscure visibility, muffle sound, and mask our approach from civilians and local authorities. It will also give you a medium to subtly influence his emotional state, a calming drop in temperature, a gentle breeze. Anything to keep him from panicking. Aurora's eyes narrowed in concentration. I can do that. I will need to be careful. A sudden gust of wind could feel like an attack to him. Exactly, Scott affirmed. Inside that fog, Logan, you'll be on tracking. His scent will be our most reliable vector if Jean loses her lock. Your job is to get us close without being detected. Logan grunted his assent, snapping the piece of wood in half with a flick of his wrist. Phase 3 is engagement, Scott said, his tone becoming graver. This is the critical part. Jean, you will establish a psychic link, but not for communication. Your sole purpose is to act as a psychic dampener. You will create a buffer around his mind, a firewall to absorb the raw emotional energy before it can trigger his power. You are our only defense against his reality warping. It will be like standing in front of a fire hose. I'm aware of the risk, Jean said quietly. While Jean has him buffered, Scott concluded, I will deliver the payload. A non-lethal, concussive optic blast, calibrated to cause immediate unconsciousness without significant physical trauma, a pinpoint strike. We take him down before he even knows we're there. Then we secure him in the onboard stasis pod and we're gone before the fog even lifts. It was a cold, efficient, military-grade plan. It was also their only option. Sounds neat, Logan said, finally pushing himself off the landing strut. Just one question. What happens when the plan goes to hell? 'Cause it always does. What happens when the kid panics before Jeannie can get the muzzle on him? Scott's jaw tightened. He met Logan's gaze. Then I switch from stun to contain. My blasts can level a city block, Logan. I'll create a crater around him if I have to. We cannot allow him to unleash that power on a populated area. No matter the cost. The unspoken part of that statement hung heavy in the air. No matter the cost to him. Wolverine said nothing more. He simply retracted his claw with a soft snick and walked up the Blackbird's ramp. The hunt was on, and he was the hound. But he couldn't shake the sick feeling in his gut that they were the real monsters in this story. Panic is a poor long-term fuel source. It burns hot and fast, leaving behind the cold, gray ash of exhaustion and despair. For 12 hours, Izuku Midoriya ran on panic. He ran until his legs were numb, until his lungs felt like they were full of ground glass. He ran until the sun went down and the neon lights of the city began to bleed into the twilight, turning Muzurifu into a strange and alien landscape. He finally collapsed in a place that felt like the city's forgotten attic, a junkyard on the industrial outskirts, a sprawling, skeletal maze of rusted cars, discarded appliances, and mountains of compacted trash. The air smelled of rust, oil, and decay. It was a graveyard of broken things, and Izuku felt right at home. He found a small, relatively dry space inside the hollowed-out shell of a delivery van. He huddled in the corner, pulling his knees to his chest, his body trembling with a combination of cold, hunger, and residual fear. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him with a hunger so sharp it was dizzying and a thirst that made his tongue feel thick and dry. He was truly, utterly alone. He couldn't go home. He would endanger his mother. He couldn't go to the police. What would he even tell them? That he was a mutant who had attacked 2 strange foreigners by accident? They would lock him up. He couldn't call Kakin or any of his classmates. They hated him. He had no one. His analytical mind, his one reliable tool, began to turn on itself. He was no longer analyzing heroes. He was analyzing his own predicament, and the conclusions were bleak. Problem: I am being hunted by a powerful, unknown organization. Known variables: they have stealth capabilities, Kitty Pryde, teleportation, Kurt Wagner, and are likely part of a larger group. Their initial approach was non-hostile, indicating a desire for capture, not elimination. However, my defensive reaction has likely changed their rules of engagement. Personal status: no food, no water, no money. No allies. My only defense is a power I cannot control and am terrified to use. Every time a strong emotion flickered through him, a pang of hunger, a wave of self-pity, a flash of anger at his situation, he felt a subtle wrongness in the air around him. The rusted metal of the van would groan. A loose hubcap outside would rattle without a breeze. He was a prisoner in his own body, forced to maintain a state of perfect, emotionless neutrality, which for someone as empathetic and anxious as Izuku, was a unique form of torture. He was starving, but he was afraid of what his hunger might do. He was terrified, but he had to suppress his terror, lest it peel the paint from the van. He spent the night in a state of suspended animation, too afraid to sleep, too exhausted to move. He watched the moon crawl across the sky through a crack in the van's rusted door, a cold, indifferent observer to his pathetic plight. By morning, desperation had begun to set in. He needed food. He needed a place to hide that wasn't a junk pile. He needed information. His thoughts turned to a name he'd only ever heard in hushed, fearful whispers among the wannabe delinquents at his school. A name from the dark side of the hero-obsessed world. Jiren. He was an information broker for the League of Villains, a shadowy figure who operated in the twilight spaces of society. He dealt in secrets, equipment, and connections. Finding him was a terrible idea, a betrayal of everything Izuku had ever dreamed of being. It was seeking help from the very forces he wanted to fight. But as he sat there, shivering and alone, the pristine dream of being a hero like All Might seemed like a fantasy from another life. His current reality was this: he was a hunted outcast. And outcasts, he reasoned with a grim, newfound pragmatism, sometimes needed to talk to other outcasts. Finding Jiren wasn't easy, but Izuku's obsessive-compulsive nature, once applied to hero analysis, was now repurposed for survival. He used the last dregs of his phone's battery to access dark web forums he'd only ever read about out of morbid curiosity. He followed a trail of cryptic posts and coded messages, using the analytical skills honed over years of dissecting hero battles to piece together a location, a discreet, high-end cigar bar in a back alley of the entertainment district, a place that catered to a clientele who valued privacy above all else. It took him the rest of the day to get there, moving through the city like a ghost. He kept his head down, his hoodie pulled up, suppressing every emotional spike with a Herculean effort of will. The city he had always loved now felt like a hostile entity, every face in the crowd a potential enemy, every police car a threat. The cigar bar was called the Smoking Mirror. It was dimly lit, the air thick with expensive smoke and the low murmur of clandestine conversations. It was no place for a 14-year-old boy in a dirty hoodie. He almost turned away, but the gnawing hunger and the chilling memory of the blue-furred man drove him forward. He walked up to the bar. The bartender, a large man with a prosthetic arm that whirred softly, gave him a dismissive look. "We don't serve kids. I am not here for a drink," Izuku stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I'm looking for Jiren." The bartender's expression hardened. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Never heard of him. Get lost before you get hurt." A wave of frustration and fear washed over Izuku. This was a mistake. As the emotion flared, the ornate, crystal ashtray on the bar beside him vibrated, letting out a high-pitched hum. The bartender's prosthetic arm twitched, its internal mechanism sputtering as if hit by an electromagnetic pulse. The bartender froze, his eyes widening slightly as he looked from the humming ashtray to Izuku. A smooth voice slid through the smoky air from a dark corner booth. Now, Haruto. Let's not be rude to potential clients." A man emerged from the shadows. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair slicked back. He had tired eyes, but they glinted with a sharp, predatory intelligence. This was Jiren. He strolled over, taking a long drag from a thin cigarette. "A bit young for my usual clientele," Jiren said, circling Izuku like a shark assessing its prey. "And you look like you've been sleeping in a trash heap. But you have a certain intensity about you." His eyes flickered to the still vibrating ashtray. "And you seem to have a unique effect on your surroundings. What can I do for you, boy?" Izuku swallowed hard. This was it. The point of no return. "I need help," he said, his voice cracking. "I need a place to stay where no one can find me. And I need to know who is hunting me." Jiren raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Hunted? You? You look more like a lost kitten than a wanted man. Who would be hunting you?" "I don't know," Izuku admitted. "They're not from around here. One looked like a demon. Blue fur, a tail. The other was a girl who could walk through walls." Jiren's practiced nonchalance faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face, which he quickly masked with a cloud of smoke. He knew of the stories, the rumors whispered among the international underworld. A team of powerful, unsanctioned mutants operating out of America. The X-Men, For them to be operating on Japanese soil, hunting a single boy, this was no lost kitten. This was something far more significant. Jiren's mind raced, calculating the potential profit and risk. A boy on the run from a team like that was either a great asset or a terrible liability. He needed to see more. A place to stay can be arranged. For a price, Jiren said smoothly. As for information, that's more expensive. What do you have to offer? What is this intensity you carry? Izuku hesitated. He couldn't tell him the truth. He couldn't show him. As if on cue, the bar's front door swung open, and two large, thuggish-looking men swaggered in. They were low-level villains, enforcers for a local Yakuza clan that Jiren had recently crossed. Jiren! The leader grunted, cracking his knuckles. His quirk manifested, his fists swelling to the size of cinder blocks. Mr. Takagi sends his regards. It's time to pay your debts. The other patrons of the bar, professionals in the art of self-preservation, began to quietly and quickly exit. Haruto, the bartender, reached under the counter, presumably for a weapon. Jiren, however, simply smiled, a cold, calculating glint in his eye. He looked from the thugs to Izuku. It seems we have an opportunity for a demonstration. He gestured to the two enforcers. You say you need help. Get rid of this trash for me, and we'll call it a down payment. He was testing him. He was putting him in the same position as the heroes who had failed him. The thug with the giant fists laughed. You're gonna have this scrawny kid fight us? This is just sad, Jiren. He lunged at Izuku. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He didn't feel the overwhelming empathy he had for Bakugo. He didn't feel the desperate panic from the park. He felt a cold, sharp spike of fear and a grim, focused determination to survive. He didn't want to hurt them. He just wanted them to be stopped. Stop. The enforcer's charge came to an abrupt, comical halt. He was frozen mid-stride, his massive fist an inch from Izuku's face. He wasn't encased in ice or held by telekinesis. He was simply stuck, as if the flow of time in his personal space had been paused. His eyes were wide with confusion and fear, the only part of him that could still move. The second thug stared, dumbfounded, before activating his own quirk. His skin took on a metallic sheen. He swung a pipe he'd been carrying at Izuku's head. Izuku flinched, throwing his arm up to block the blow. He didn't want to get hit. The simple, childish desire flashed through his mind. The pipe swung through the air. But as it neared Izuku's arm, its physical properties changed. The solid steel became as soft and yielding as boiled noodle. It wrapped around Izuku's arm with a harmless thwomp, dangling there limply. The bar fell silent. The second thug stared at his now useless weapon. The first was still frozen in his ridiculous pose. Jiren's smile widened. It was no longer just calculating. It was filled with genuine, greedy awe. This was not a quirk. Quirks were specific, definable powers. This was something else. This boy didn't have a power. He was power. He was a blank check from the universe, and he had just walked into Jiren's bar. Impressive, Jiren said, his voice a purr. Very impressive indeed. He snapped his fingers. Haruto, show our young guest to the suite upstairs. Get him some food, and a change of clothes. He turned his back on the two stunned thugs. And get this rubbish out of my bar. He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder, a gesture that was both reassuring and possessive. Don't you worry, my boy, Jiren said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. You've come to the right place. We'll keep you safe. We'll find out who's hunting you. As Izuku was led away, weak with relief and a growing sense of dread at the devil's bargain he had just struck, Jiren pulled out his phone. He had a very important call to make. The League of Villains was always looking for new power. But this was something their master, the legendary All-for-One, would want to see for himself. This boy wasn't just a new recruit. He was a prize. Meanwhile, thousands of feet above the Pacific Ocean, the blackbird sliced through the stratosphere, a silent, invisible dart. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with concentration. Jean Grey sat in a high-tech chair, a neuroenhancement helmet connected to the jet's systems covering her head. Her eyes were closed, her face a serene mask, but a single bead of sweat trickled down her temple. "I have him," she announced, her voice echoing slightly through the cabin's comm system. "It's faint. He's suppressing his emotions. It's like he's holding his breath psychically. But he's there, in the city. The signature is stationary. On the tactical display, a single red dot blinked to life. Location locked," Scott said. "He's in a building in the Kabukicho district." "Ororo, begin deployment." "Understood," Storm replied. From her seat, she extended her senses, reaching out to the atmosphere over Muzurifu. The clear afternoon sky began to change. A thin, unnatural mist started to form at high altitude, slowly descending like a silent, gray blanket. On the ground, no one would notice at first, just a hazy afternoon turning into a foggy evening. But for the X-Men, it was the opening move on a chessboard the size of a city. The Blackbird descended, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to radar and the naked eye. It settled silently on the roof of a skyscraper several blocks from their target. The rear ramp hissed open, revealing the swirling, manufactured fog. "Boots on the ground in 5, Scott commanded. "Final checks." Logan stood at the edge of the ramp, his nose twitching as he tasted the air. Even from this distance, through the recycled air of the jet and the descending fog, he could smell it. A faint, almost imperceptible scent beneath the city's cacophony of smells. The scent of ozone, fear, and something that smelled vaguely like cherry blossoms. "Got his trail," he growled. "He smells like a thunderstorm and a panic attack." They moved out, a 4-person ghost squad melting into the fog-shrouded city. They moved across the rooftops, a perfectly coordinated unit. Storm flew above them, a living part of the weather she commanded, guiding the fog, keeping them concealed. Logan led the way, his senses guiding them through the urban canyons. Jean walked behind him, her mind focused, preparing to erect her psychic shield. Scott brought up the rear, his hand never straying from his visor, his eyes scanning every shadow. They were the best at what they do. They were the X-Men. And they were coming for Izuku Midoriya. He had found a temporary shelter in the criminal underworld, a gilded cage offered by a wolf. But he had no idea that a far more dangerous, far more determined pack of predators was now closing in, their hunt about to reach its terrifying conclusion. In the deepest, most secure sublevel of a nondescript building in Kamino Ward, a man who was more monument than flesh sat tethered to a throne of life-sustaining machinery. His face was a featureless landscape of scar tissue, dominated by the complex, skull-like helmet that fed him air, nutrients, and information. He had no eyes, but he saw more than any man alive. He was All for One, the bogeyman of Japan's underworld, a centuries-old predator who had once ruled the nation from the shadows. The air in his chamber was cold, sterile, and silent, save for the rhythmic hiss and pump of his life support. The monitors that surrounded him displayed a constant stream of data, stock market fluctuations, political news, hero patrol routes, and 100 other threads of the vast, intricate web he manipulated. For the past 24 hours, however, one monitor had been dedicated to a single, fascinating anomaly. It displayed filtered energy readings, eyewitness accounts, and blurry phone footage from the sludge villain incident. The official reports were laughably simplistic, a neat package of heroic triumph courtesy of All Might. But All for One saw the truth between the lines. He saw the inconsistencies, the moments that defied conventional quirk science. His vast network of spies and sensors had picked up the same reality tremor that had screamed through Cerebro, a discordant note in the symphony of the world. He had initially dismissed it as a new, powerful quirk, another potential jewel to be added to his collection. He had stolen hundreds of quirks over the centuries, from the mundane to the magnificent. He understood their nature, their mechanics, their limits. But this was different. The transmutation of a villain into cherry blossoms was not a quirk. A quirk might allow one to manipulate plants, or even transmute matter in a limited, specific way. But to spontaneously rewrite a complex, sentient being into an unrelated, equally complex organic form was a violation of the fundamental laws of conservation of energy and mass. It was not a manipulation of reality. It was a wholesale act of creation born from a moment of crisis. Then came the second report, this one from Jiren. His most reliable, if annoyingly mercenary, broker. The boy who had appeared in his bar. The boy who could freeze a man in time and turn a steel pipe into a noodle with nothing more than a flinch. The description Jiren had provided of the two enforcers, one trapped in a bubble of stop time, the other holding a uselessly flaccid weapon, was not the work of a single quirk. It suggested two, or perhaps three, completely distinct and reality-defying abilities, used instinctively, without conscious thought. A slow, rasping sound, the closest thing to a chuckle his ruined vocal cords could produce, echoed in the chamber. "Kurojiri," he said, his voice a synthesized baritone transmitted through a speaker in his helmet. A swirling vortex of purple-black mist coalesced in the center of the room, resolving into the form of a man in a waistcoat, his body, head, and face composed of the same dark fog, with only two malevolent yellow eyes visible. "You summoned me, master," Kurojiri said, his voice smooth and deferential. "The boy Jiren has acquired." All for one began. "He is not a quirk user, indeed, master?" Kurojiri inquired. Jiren's report was enthusiastic. "He believes the boy possesses multiple, high-level quirks. Jiren is a merchant. He sees the product, not the process." All for one corrected. "I have been analyzing the energy signatures from the Muzutafu incident. They do not match any quirk profile in my extensive database, nor do they align with the biological markers associated with quirk activation. This is something older, more fundamental, a power that does not come from a genetic fluke in the Age of Heroes, but from a deeper, more primal source." He had encountered whispers of such things before. The X gene. A rare, volatile mutation that predated quirks, often resulting in powers of incredible, terrifying scope. He had always considered it a competing product line, one he had little access to. But this was an Omega-level specimen, dropped right into his lap. The potential was staggering. A quirk could be stolen, mastered, and utilized. But a power like this? A power that seemed to command reality itself? To possess that would be to transcend the very concept of quirks. It would be to become a god in truth, not just in ambition. But first, it needed to be understood. A power born of emotion is a wild, untamed thing. All for one mused, the lights on his console reflecting in the polished surface of his helmet. It is a weapon without a trigger, firing at random. To wield it, one must understand its limits. One must see how it reacts under pressure. He turned his unseen gaze towards Kurojiri. Jiren has him sheltered, believing he has secured a valuable asset. He is a good broker, but a poor zookeeper. We cannot simply take the boy. We need to test the animal in its cage. "A test, master? A controlled experiment?" All for one clarified. "I want to see what happens when he is pushed to the absolute brink. Not just fear. Not just frustration. I want to see what his power does when faced with an unstoppable force, a being of pure, manufactured rage that cannot be reasoned with or emotionally manipulated." His scarred, lipless mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "Prepare a Hyanoma. One of the new batch from Dr. Garaki's private stock." Kurojiri's yellow eyes widened slightly. The Hyanoma were a class apart from the mindless beasts he had unleashed at the USJ. They were handcrafted biological nightmares, each built with a dozen stolen quirks, possessing rudimentary intelligence and the capacity for tactical thought, all slave to a singular, overriding directive. They were his scalpels, reserved for his most important operations. "Which one, master?" Kurojiri asked. "Subject Chimera." All for one commanded. "The one with hyperregeneration, kinetic absorption, and shockwave projection. Its mind is a blank slate, filled only with the desire to destroy. It will not feel fear, or pity, or confusion. It will be a perfect, relentless stimulus. Its mission will not be to kill the boy. Not yet. Its mission is to break him, to push him past his limits and force his power to manifest in its rawest, most glorious form." He leaned back in his throne, the hum of his machinery a counterpoint to his rising excitement. "Jiren has placed the boy in a warehouse district on the coast for safekeeping, a wonderfully isolated laboratory. You will transport Chimera there. Let it loose. I will observe everything through its senses." "And what of Jiren?" Kurojiri asked. "Let him watch as well." A frightened merchant is a more compliant merchant, all for one rasped. Let him see the true nature of the power he has stumbled upon. Let him understand that he is no longer the broker. He is merely the delivery boy. Kurojiri bowed low. As you command, master. The dark mist that comprised his form swirled and expanded, engulfing him completely before vanishing with a faint whisper of displaced air. All for One was left alone once more in his silent tomb. He had set the stage. He had introduced the catalyst into the experiment. On one side, a terrified boy whose emotions could rewrite the laws of physics. On the other, a mindless, bioengineered monster of pure destruction. It was a beautiful, elegant equation. And he, the mathematician, would be watching, waiting to see the glorious, chaotic result. He had been a player in the shadows for too long. It was time to remind the world what true power looked like. The suite Jiren had provided was more like a gilded cage. It was a spacious, well-furnished loft apartment above the cigar bar, with a comfortable bed, a stocked refrigerator, and a large window overlooking the rain-slicked street. It was a paradise compared to the rusted van in the junkyard, but the doors locked from the outside, and the windows were made of reinforced, bulletproof glass. Izuku had spent the first hour in a state of dazed disbelief. He had devoured the food left for him, a simple bento box that tasted like the most exquisite meal he'd ever had. He had taken a long, hot shower, washing away the grime and filth of the past 2 days. He put on the clean, simple clothes, a plain black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, that had been laid out for him. He felt human again. But the feeling was soured by the gnawing guilt in his stomach. He had made a deal with a villain. He had used his power, this terrifying curse, to impress him. He had stepped onto a path that led directly away from his dream. He stood before the large window, looking down at the fog that had begun to creep through the streets. It was unnaturally thick, clinging to the ground and swallowing the neon lights of the district, creating a silent, gray world. A strange sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck. The fog felt wrong. It felt deliberate. A knock at the door made him jump. It was Jiren, holding 2 glasses of what looked like juice. Settling in, I hope? The broker asked, his smile as smooth and artificial as ever. He handed a glass to Izuku. Just some apple juice. You look like you could use the sugar. Izuku took it hesitantly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jiren said, taking a sip from his own glass. We have business to discuss. I made some inquiries. The people you described, the Blue Demon and the Ghost Girl, they fit the description of a rather infamous group of American vigilantes. Unsanctioned, but powerful. They call themselves the X-Men. Izuku's blood ran cold. The X-Men. He'd heard of them. They were legends, myths. A team of powerful mutants who operated outside the law, sometimes as heroes, sometimes as something else entirely. The fact that they were real, and that they were hunting him, was a terrifying confirmation of how serious his situation was. Why? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why would they be after me? Jiren shrugged, feigning ignorance. That's the million-yen question, isn't it? Perhaps they see your unique talents as a threat. Or perhaps they want them for themselves. He leaned against the wall, his eyes glinting. Which brings me to my employer. He is a man of great vision and power. He is very, very interested in individuals like yourself. He believes you shouldn't be hunted. He believes you should be nurtured. Honed. He is willing to offer you protection, resources, and something no one else can, an education in how to control the phenomenal power you possess. It was the offer of a lifetime. It was everything he wanted. Control. Safety. Understanding. But the offer was coming from the shadows, from the broker of the League of Villains. It was a devil's bargain. Before Izuku could respond, Jiren's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, his mask of cool composure slipped. A flicker of genuine fear crossed his face. What is it? Izuku asked. Change of plans? Jiren said, his voice suddenly strained. He grabbed Izuku by the arm. We're leaving. Now. Leaving? Where are we going? To a more secure location. My employer, he's fast-tracking your introduction. Jiren dragged him out of the suite and down a back staircase that led to a private garage. A sleek black car was waiting, but as they approached it, the air in the garage grew heavy, charged with a sudden, oppressive energy. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. A swirling vortex of black mist, identical to the one in All for One's chamber, opened up in front of them. Kurogiri stepped out, his yellow eyes fixing on Jiren. Kurogiri. Jiren stammered, shoving Izuku behind him. This is irregular. The Master's instructions were to secure the asset and await further. The Master's plans have been updated, Kurogiri said, his voice devoid of emotion. He has arranged for a field test. Here, from the dark gate behind Kurogiri, a sound emerged. It was a low, guttural growl, a wet, bestial sound that vibrated through the concrete floor. Something massive shifted in the darkness of the warp gate. A creature stepped out. It was a Hien Nomu, a masterpiece of biological horror. It stood over 8 feet tall, its skin a patchwork of gray, leathery hide and exposed, pulsating muscle. Its head was vaguely humanoid but lacked any features save for a wide, jawless maw filled with needle-like teeth. 4 powerful arms, 2 large and 2 smaller, sprouted from its torso. Its legs were digitigrade, ending in sharp talons that scraped against the ground. But its most terrifying feature was its eyes. It had no eyes. Its face was a blank canvas of rage. This was Chimera. What is that thing? Jiren whispered, his voice trembling. A diagnostic tool, Kurogiri stated calmly. He turned his yellow eyes to Izuku, who was frozen in place, his mind screaming. Our master wishes to observe the subject's capabilities under extreme duress. Do try to survive. It will make for a better data set. The Nomu, Chimera, let out a deafening roar. It was not a sound of communication, but a pure expression of its manufactured purpose, destruction. It lunged forward, not at Jiren, but directly at Izuku. Its movements were impossibly fast for a creature its size. Jiren shoved Izuku aside, a purely reflexive act of self-preservation. Izuku stumbled and fell, scraping his hands on the rough concrete. The Nomu's massive fist slammed into the wall where Izuku's head had been a second before, pulverizing a section of the concrete into dust. Izuku stared, his heart a block of ice in his chest. This thing, it wasn't like the sludge villain. It wasn't trying to capture him. It wasn't like the Yakuza thugs, trying to intimidate him. This creature had a single, terrifying purpose written in its every movement. It wanted to erase him. On a rooftop 4 blocks away, the X-Men felt the convergence. Energy spike! Jean called out, her hand pressed to her temple. It's not him. It's something else. A warp gate. Kurogiri. The League of Villains. Logan's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. She's right. New scent. Strong. Ozone, and something else, something rotten. Manufactured. They're making a move on the boy. Scott deduced instantly, his mind racing. They must have been tracking him, too. This complicated things immeasurably. Their surgical strike had just become a chaotic 3-way engagement. Then we have to move. No, Jean urged. There's another presence with them. It's so God. It feels empty. Nothing but rage. Pure, unending rage. They're sicking something on him. Suddenly, a new energy signature erupted on their sensors, originating from the same location. It was the chaotic, reality-bending energy of Paragon. It flared violently, like a solar flare. He's panicking! Jean yelled. His power is flaring! They're provoking him! Go! Scott commanded. There was no time for stealth now. Storm leaped from the roof, the wind catching her and carrying her towards the source of the disturbance. Logan followed, running to the edge and launching himself into the fog, his claws extended to catch onto the side of the next building. Cyclops and Jean ran after him, their priorities shifting from capture to damage control. The hunt had reached its violent, unplanned climax. They were no longer just hunters. They were racing to stop an execution, and to prevent the victim's dying scream from tearing a hole in the city. In the dark garage, the battle, if it could be called that, was a maelstrom of chaos. The Noma was relentless. It was a force of nature, a hurricane of fists and claws. Izuku scrambled away, his mind a blank wall of terror. He didn't have time for a focused wish or a specific desire. All he felt was a desperate, all-consuming need to not die. His power responded erratically, wildly. A swing from the Nomu's massive arm was met with a localized temporal flux. The arm slowed to a crawl in midair, allowing Izuku to duck under it. The Nomu's smaller arms jabbed at him, and the air in front of Izuku solidified into a wall of shimmering, glass-like force, which shattered on impact but bought him a precious second. The creature roared in frustration and stomped its foot. A shockwave of concussive force erupted from the ground. Izuku was thrown backwards, but as the wave hit him, his power reacted again. The kinetic energy didn't break his bones, it transmuted into a blinding flash of harmless, multicolored light and a shower of musical notes that hung in the air like dust motes before fading. Jiren and Kurogyri watched from a safe distance, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. Incredible! Jiren breathed. He's not even trying. He's just surviving. The master will be pleased, Kurogyri said, his yellow eyes glowing. The data is invaluable, the Nomu adapted. Its rudimentary intelligence, guided by all for one's observation, recognized that its direct attacks were being negated. It changed tactics. It ignored Izuku for a moment, and slammed its fists into the support pillars of the garage. The building groaned, dust and debris raining from the ceiling. It was going to bring the whole place down on top of them. This was the breaking point. Izuku saw the cracks spreading across the ceiling. He saw Jiren's terrified face. He saw the cold indifference in Kurogyri's misty form. He was going to be buried alive. His fear morphed into a new, sharper emotion, despair. It's no use. I can't win. I can't escape. It's over. The despair was a black hole, and his power, which had been flaring wildly to protect him, began to be drawn into it. The air in the garage grew thin and cold. The emergency lights flickered and dimmed, not from a lack of power, but as if the very concept of light was being drained away. The edges of the Nomu began to blur, its form wavering as if reality itself was losing its grip. This was no longer a defense. This was an unmaking. A wave of pure entropy was beginning to emanate from him, threatening to dissolve everything, the Nomu, the garage, the city block, into nothingness. It was at that precise moment that the X-Men arrived. The garage's main metal shutter was torn from its hinges by a focused blast of wind from Storm. 4 figures stood silhouetted against the foggy streetlights. Wolverine was the first one in, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he took in the scene. The terrified boy, the monstrous Nomu, the 2 villains. The Nomu, registering new threats, turned its featureless face towards them and roared. X-Men! Cyclops yelled, his voice a commanding bark that cut through the chaos. Gene, now! On the boy! The other players had entered the game, turning All for One's controlled experiment into a bloody, unpredictable free-for-all. The hunt was over. The battle for the fate of Izuku Midoriya, and the city of Muzurifu, had just begun.